So thank you very much, everyone, for turning up. So like I said earlier, my name is Allar Kaasik, and I am the senior visual effects tutor here at Escape Studios, and also look after the short courses and the postgraduate courses, mostly known as the conversion masters. So the students that I teach, they come from different backgrounds and art and engineering, and we make them into professional visual effects artists. And one of the common questions that we often get from our applicants is they're not always totally sure what is the difference between 2D and 3D, and what different roles are there in the industry. I myself used to work, and still every now and again work, as a compositor, which is a 2D field. So what I do is I put everything together in the end. So what we are going to look at in this webinar today is what are the 2D and 3D differences, and we will do an introduction into the different roles that you could have in visual effects. So if you're just interested in what visual effects is, this is the great webinar to learn more about what visual effects is. And if you're interested in some particular roles, then this will hopefully give you some introduction to all the different roles that are out there. And beyond that, I also want to kind of do a quick introduction on the second half of this webinar towards getting your first job, and how to then turn that job into a career as well. So a few kind of comments on that as well is that, you know, it's great to know about what visual effects is and what people do there, but eventually you might want to do it yourself. So how would you get started on that? So I'll start with this, which is this is a very simplified version of how films get made. And there's generally three main stages that we are, as visual effects artists, are involved in. And the important bit generally that people know most about is the shoot. That's the thing that happens in the middle. You have your actors, you have the director. They're on the set and they're filming things, and you know that's called the principal photography. That's where you get the film in sort of in historical sense. That's where most of it was made. But visual effects generally, a huge part of that happens afterwards. Once you've shot everything, then you start adding visual effects to it. But also a good amount of it actually happens before that. And the reason is that when you go on a set and you, for example, use green screen behind the people so that you can replace what's behind the people with some new environment, for example, you kind of want to know in advance what that environment is. Also, there are a lot of things that you can do even before you start shooting the film. If you know that you're filming the next Star Wars, it's probably going to have some spaceships. So you can start concepting that, you can start making those things even before you actually get to the shooting stage. And very often you want to do that because when you get to the set, people want to know how big is it going to be. The actors want some kind of reference, what to look at. So in this webinar, I will show you some examples of our students' work, and that's something I want to point out as well, is that everything we will see today is something that our students do here in Escape Studios, and the kind of projects they get involved in. So and these are all geared directly towards our students getting jobs, which they all, well, yeah, most of them do, and not just jobs, specialist jobs, the ones that they actually studied. So let's start with 3D, and this is a good example from one of our past students who afterwards worked here for a while as one of our studio assistants. Now works in one of the big VFX companies doing exactly that. And here's a shot of his little tank. And it's an interesting one to look at because it demonstrates a few different things that a 3D artist would do. So 3D is made out of modeling, texturing. It involves things like match moving, and finally rendering, which is then turning it into a picture in the end. And this reel illustrates this quite well. So the first stage in here is you kind of want to create a model, this three-dimensional object, and it is made out of these smaller faces. So we have these modeling softwares that allow us to create these objects that may have never existed. And this is why you would do visual effects in the first place, is that maybe we couldn't afford to have a real tank on the set. Maybe we weren't able to, even if we could, maybe we have to do something to this tank that, we have to blow it up or something like that, something we couldn't afford to do on a set. Or maybe it's meant to be a spaceship and we just don't have the money to build a spaceship. So 3D is the kind of art of generating new objects to a large degree. But also because you do it visual effects for film, you need to combine this with the real world footage. So generally, when you make film, you shoot some footage. In film language, we call it plates, and you want your object to feel like it is in that environment. So, for instance, in this example, after modeling, you want to create a texture on this so that this object would behave and look like an actual metal object. So a texture artist would be dealing with things like creating rust, choosing what material properties there are. So here we can see this kind of rust actually building up from the top, this deterioration. And when you want to combine this thing with real footage, you have to do this process which is called match moving, whereby you try to figure out, using some references on the set. For example, we could use these things called tracking markers, just put some markers on the set. By looking at their movement, you can figure out how did the real camera move, and therefore you can make a virtual camera which moves around your virtual object, the given tank in the case, and it now looks like this tank is moving in the same way as the footage. So it feels like they're all together. So this match moving part is something that the 3D artists do to make their objects sit in the shot, right size, right movement, and finally the object needs to be rendered. So from this three-dimensional object, what you get is a two-dimensional picture, which then goes on to the other department, which is the 2D artists such as me, who are compositors, who try to then blend it into the shot. So in which stages do VFX artists work with 3D? Mostly in this, just going to struggle for a moment with making things full screen there. So mostly again in the pipeline, you can actually start with quite a lot of this modeling and texturing and shading even before you film things. Because if you know that you're going to make a model of a tank and you're looking for a footage, you could actually do it the other way around. You can make a tank and then find appropriate footage in which to put this. So you can do some of this asset generation. The 3D department does that before you get to the 2D stage. The match moving obviously should happen after you have the footage, because you need to make your object move like your footage does. One thing that I didn't comment yet is an area called lighting, whereby when you made your object and you put it into the shot, you also want to make lights in the object in a way that it would feel like the light is coming from the right direction. So the shadows underneath, the highlights are on the right side. And again, this is something that the 3D artist would do before they render out the image and give it to a 2D artist. So 2D artists, what they do is they work with footage that's been given to them. The footage can be actual footage itself, something that was filmed, or it could be things that were rendered from 3D artists and have been rendered, and they are now footage. So you have a footage of a tank, footage of a background, and you as a 2D artist put those things together. But very often, 2D artists also work with single images such as this. So let's have a look at this. So here, that's an example of cleanup. And this is something that one of my students did here as an exercise. Sometimes when you shoot a film, you accidentally shoot something that you didn't intend to shoot. That could be camera crew. It could be things that you weren't able to remove. So for example, if you shoot on location, someone just parked their car over there and you weren't able to move that car and you can't have that car in the shot. Or you shoot a period drama and you have things like lampposts and things like gutters and things that weren't there in that period. So what you have is a VFX artist, a 2D artist, removing those objects and trying to make it look like they were never there. So for example, in this shot, you would look at this and be like, well, just looks like a carriage. But originally, it had all those modern elements. And in addition to that, there was also another horse. But let's say for whatever reason, we were not able to have them for story-wise, because maybe back in the days they didn't have plastic. So what you have to do is you have to take this footage that you've been given and, for example, try to remove objects, try to recreate what should have been there. So this is one of the things that 2D artists do, which is called roto prep. It's often also an entry-level job, and it's an entry-level job because it has a very clear goal. And you can choose, you can kind of know yourself whether you've done a good job or not. You don't really need a strong artistic supervisor to tell you that you have completed this cleanup well, because you can see, does it look real? Yes, well, then it's done. If it doesn't look real, well, then you have to work more. Whereas if you have to composite more creative things, such as adding a new CG element into the shot, or to deal with things such as compositing explosions and smoke elements and things like that, you then have to start thinking about finding references, comparing it with things. But roto prep is often quite clear, which is why it is often an entry-level position. It is also quite hard because you have to create things that look real, which is why very big companies such as ILM, they treat their prep artists with the same authority as their compositing artists. It's a slightly different discipline if you want to be a senior prep artist. Some people enjoy that and get into that. I have another great video which explains a few other disciplines and roles that a 2D artist, compositor has to do. So we've seen a little bit the roto prep, and let's see. This is a great video that one of my past students put together after he studied with us here, that just explains a little bit about visual effects. So I'm just going to check that the sound works on this as well.
In today's films, it is possible to create almost anything. But the work is definitely not that easy. It includes many hours of attention to small detail, lots of creativity, and a high level of skill. This world is called VFX and is built from many parts in a long pipeline that creates something amazing. And that's what you see on the big screen. The last role in this long pipeline of visual effects is called digital compositing, which is a creative process of assembling filmed and rendered elements from multiple sources to create a final, lifelike illusion. What is that, you ask? Let me show you. It's a profession that includes many skills such as rotoscoping, which separates the foreground from the background, and there are all kinds of techniques to accomplish it. In films, it is common to use a blue or green screen to easily remove the background from behind the actors, and that is called keying. And by doing that, we can create a more realistic background behind the actor. Tracking is another side of the story, and it is very important to know how to do well. There's 2D tracking, and there's 3D tracking, which recreates the exact movement of the camera. Another big part of this job is to remove objects, cables, and trackers, and paint them out and insert something else instead. And, of course, there's computer-generated elements, or, in short, CG compositing. But my friends always say VFX looks fake.
So a nice example of what can be done in 2D. So 2D tends to happen generally after the shoot because you need the footage to start with. And the footage can come from the shoot. It can be live action, something that people actually filmed, or it could be something that was generated by the 3D artists, and the 2D artist has to put it together. And this is, I think, where really it isn't, it's never really a 2D versus 3D. We are just kind of drawing the distinction in here because people have different interests. It is really 2D and 3D, people working together, because that's the whole point. You want to make something together. The 3D artists, they create things, the 2D artists, they put them together, and there's a lot of work that kind of both of these put into it creatively. So here's a fairly recent example from some of my MA students who are working on this project together as a group. And here's a little edit of that. So it's an interesting example because it involves both pure 2D and 3D that has been rendered and composited as well. So some of the examples in here is that in the first shot, all of these wires, this barbed wire in here, it wasn't there. The whole set is a building site. It wasn't as exciting, so we wanted it to look more like a slightly futuristic abandoned building that the military has taken over. And they're performing some kind of cloning experiments in there, which is why that lady has a clone attacking her in the end as well. So they added things like this toxic waste in here. Before that, it was puddles which weren't that interesting, so we made puddles that look more interesting. And likewise here, we have objects that were there, the fence was there, but we didn't have the barbed wire to go on top of that, so the 3D artist made some barbed wire, and the 2D artist composited that into the shot to make it look like it's actually there, to make it feel like this is the real barbed wire. And in order to do things like that, you have to even include things such as the shadow of the barbed wire on the floor. So a 2D artist is the one that kind of puts the whole thing together in the end. And that can involve quite a lot of creativity as well. And you always have the goal of making things look photoreal. Another example in here is that this shot in the end, clearly we didn't have the capacity to actually hire triplets, so instead we had to use the same actress 3 times and composite her into the same shot. And what 2D artists also did in this shot is they made these beams, and a lot of these kind of things they can be quite creative, because what is a beam from a futuristic gun meant to look like? So here we actually involved some of our motion graphics students as well, to give this beam in the end a more animated look. And the motion graphics artists, students, they also added things onto the screen. So the 2D and 3D, they work together. So it's not one versus the other one, it's the two of them working together. I'll show you one more example, which is a very nice one. And for this one, I'll kind of try to break down visually what different roles were involved in this particular shot. And I'm trying to hopefully use this software that we use for sharing this video. So let's see if that all works. So here's the shot first. Let's look at it first. So this shot is from an external project that one of my students was using as their part of their final thesis work. It was directed by Tito Fernandez, and my student Jordan, who also now works in visual effects because, well, he did a good job at his MA. So he was the one who composited this whole thing together. So the first part of this is that we have some pure 2D roles. We've talked about compositing, the person who puts things together. We've talked about cleanup, but there's also another one which is called matte painting. So for example, let's do some annotations in here. At the back, all of that over there, that's matte painting. And what matte painting is taking pictures and photos and trying to put them together in a way that looks like it's a real background. So it's not meant to be just a, something that looks cool, but it's actually meant to look like it's real. So you have to think about things like the lighting angle, so that it matches what the shot is. And this girl, she wasn't in the desert. So what was happening here is she was in front of a green screen. So the compositor had to key that person. So remove the green screen background and apply this real background behind her. But there's a few other things that the compositor has done, even in this first stage in here. So I'm just going to save these drawings and then clear them. If you look at this shot in the beginning, you can see that there is atmospheric effects. There's a little bit of heat haze. There's some dust. there's a shadow on the floor, and there wasn't the floor. She was on a green screen. So the shadow is also something that has been created afterwards. And this is something that, again, the compositing artist adds to make this shot feel more real, to make it feel alive. It's not meant to look like a still image or a photo. It's meant to look like it's a real environment. Then we have a fair bit of 3D that has happened in here. So I'm just going to use one of these frames where we can see just the spaceships at the back. So a few things that we kind of saw already is that we do need modeling. Someone needs to create this spaceship. We don't have a real one, and we think that would be cool to have a spaceship, and they have created something like that. There's another thing which we haven't mentioned yet, is that the spaceships are moving. So you need someone to actually animate them as well. And not only are they moving, but when they're moving, they have these engines that rotate a little bit. So the wings move a little bit. There's these rotations, things like that. So for the animator to be able to move things, so we have animation. And animation is a 3D discipline, but in some departments, animation, in some companies, animation actually is its own department, because animation, in some ways, it is technical, but it is even more about expression and acting and directing. So in the given case, it's spaceships, but even for the spaceships, there is some acting involved. There's a little bit of bump when they kind of land. There's they don't just fall and stand there, but there's something that kind of, there's a sense of expression in that. So there's animation, and in order for people to animate things, I mentioned that these wings, they have to move. So what another artist would do for that is they would create controls. If it's characters, then they put skeletons inside of the characters, and which allow the animator to move this character. And the person responsible for that is a rigging artist. So a rigger deals with creating controls in a way that animator would then be able to take this model with those controls and animate them conveniently. Not to you have to move every single face individually, but to have just a set of controls that give you the range of behaviors that you want to express as an animator. So we also mentioned earlier lighting, and again, lighting is important here. So we can see that lighting has to match the plate as well, the footage. So a lighting artist would deal with that, which is one of the last thing that happens in a 3D pipeline, because lighting very much depends on what type of a material we are lighting. So before you get to lighting, you would have someone like a texture artist creating textures for this model. So for this model, there are details on it, these little bumps, these little bolts and things like that. But there's also some other details like these logos. What kind of color are they? And this is done by a texture artist. Related to texture is something called materials, and that materials and shading maybe in bigger places a different discipline. So shading and materials, they refer to how materials actually would interact with light. So you can have rough materials, you can have shiny materials, metallic materials, plastic looking materials, and the texture artist can do some of that, but also in bigger places, you have people who are just very interested in both emulating reality, but also creating materials that maybe wouldn't behave in the way that they would in the real world. But this all goes into the 3D department. And finally, you have one guy who would then render the whole thing. May not even be a different discipline. Again, you could do all of these things yourself. If you do that, you would be known as a 3D generalist. 3D generalists are very highly valued, but at the same time, in very big companies, what you get is you get more specializing. So people work in more narrow disciplines because it is also easier to become an expert in a narrower discipline. And if you have a very big company, you can have the option to take a lot of these experts and then put them to work together. So each one of them brings something to the final product, and each one of them brings a little bit of creativity and a little bit of technical skill, more than maybe one person who knows just a little bit of everything would be able to do. So if you have someone who's really, really good at rigging, someone who's really, really good at animation, those two working together can do more than one person doing it on its own. Nice. Right. Another one which is interesting, just to add to this, I'm going to clear all these drawings, is that, which is a sort of a discipline in its own right. Again, 3D artists do that, but it's something called FX. And so far we've been talking about visual effects in general, but FX, spelled as FX, is also a narrower discipline that deals with things like dynamics or simulations, and it can be a very, very technical field. Again, in visual effects, you can choose how technical you want to be. You can choose how technical or how artistic you want to be, and within any of these subdisciplines, you also have the range of within that. Do you want to be the really, really technical guy, or really artistic guy? For me, the compositing was a good balance. I can be very technical, but I also have a lot of artistic freedom because I put the shot together in the end. But you could be, it really depends what amount of balance you want. Some people really like being more technical. Some people really like being more artistic. And there is a job for everyone in VFX. So this part in here, these dust simulations, this would be something that an FX artist would do. So here we have FX. And this includes things like fluid simulations, and things like fog and dust are often, they use the same equations as fluids. But VFX artists also deal with, FX artists, they also deal with things like explosions, and that can be both the smoke that comes out of the explosion, the fire, but also things like what's known as the rigid body dynamics, RBD, objects breaking. So if you have a brick wall, the bricks all falling onto each other behave in a way that is set by physics, and these artists, they simulate that, and it's sort of a form of animation because what they create is moving things, but it is something that's kind of based on rules that they have control over. So it is a simulated way. So this was a sort of a good coverage of the different 2D and 3D roles that are out there. Just going to save these and escape this. And just move back to this. I'm just going to also clear those annotations. So we've seen that within 3D, there are more departments than this. And within 2D as well, we have compositing, but you also have the rotoscoping and prep department, and you have the matte painting people who create things. So it is quite a big field. But hopefully you got some introduction of what different roles there are. So we will do a quick Q&A in the end as well. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to write, and I will try to answer as many as I can in the end. But I wanted to move on to the next bit, which is explaining, well, how do you get into visual effects? If you now have a better understanding what is the difference between 2D and 3D, in overall terms, 3D creates things, 2D uses existing things that have been created and puts them together creatively. Then how do you get a job in it? How do you get into the world of visual effects? So escape this. Looking at this, how do we get the job? So there are more than one way of getting into visual effects. But you need some kind of requirements. First of all, you have to have skills. If you want to get into 2D, you kind of need to know how to do 2D. Or if you want to get into 3D, you kind of need to know how to do 3D. And I mean, it's very obvious in some ways, but you kind of have to have skills. So you have to get those skills somehow. And what you could do is you could watch tutorials online. Video Copilot is a good example. It has lots of free tutorials for things like After Effects, you know, you can learn at home. These days, there's a lot of resources out there. The issue with learning on your own is that you don't necessarily know all the things that you need to learn. So if you take a course, then the benefit is that hopefully you are being taught by someone who actually knows about the topic that they speak. So which in our case, in Escape Studios, all our tutors also work and have worked in the respective disciplines. So everyone who teaches here also has actually done that work as well, which is important in the sense that if you were to learn driving, you would want to learn driving from someone who has passed both the written exam but also the practical exam. It's so you want to be taught by someone who also knows how to actually do it. So doing a course is a very good option because you can learn things that you didn't necessarily know yourself that you actually need to investigate. And this is the benefit of more formal education, is that you get the materials, but also you will find things that you didn't know that you didn't know. There is another option, which is that you can work as a runner. You can go to a VFX company and get an entry-level job, which involves sometimes technical aspects, a lot of client-facing roles, making coffees, making teas, and doing errands. You're just running errands. But the benefit of that is that you get to meet a lot of the artists. You get to see what they all do, and you get to also meet the clients, and you get to meet all the senior people in the company as well. And when you work there, generally as a runner, people are very helpful. They do like people to progress, and you can pick up skills on the job. Before the days of structured education for visual effects, that was pretty much the only way to get into visual effects. You go into the company, you start working there, doing something else, and then on the job you learn what you need to do in order to do what you actually want to do. These days it's easier. You can just do a course. So once you have the skills, you need people to know about your skills. So the way that you do that is you make a show reel. And in order to make a show reel, you just want to show your best work. So you show your best work, and you don't show the work that's not that good. The reason is that the persons who's looking at your show reel, they won't know whether the work that you're showing is complete in your eyes or not. So only show that you think is actually the best work. But also very importantly, and something that I have to stress to my students as well, because when they work, when they study here, they make shots and they make the show reels, and after they study here, they stay around for a little bit longer making the show reels. Is that in the end you actually do have to apply for jobs, and that's a very important part, is that your show reel is also at some stage good enough to actually apply for jobs, because maybe they are not looking for all of the skills that you want to demonstrate. Maybe they're looking for that one particular thing. For example, if you want to go into compositing, but there is a roto position available, they can see that you can do good roto, you can already get at that job. So you do also actually have to apply for jobs. That's so again, it's a very obvious thing to say, but I do need to every now and again remind my students to do that. So let's say you got your first job, happy days. Then, how do you get your second job, which would be known as a career? So in order to get a career, you have to keep improving your skills. Visual effects is a very, very fast-moving industry. It uses all the latest techniques, and every bigger company has their own research and development department. They try to create new techniques to make things work quicker and to make VFX look better and cooler, and that also means that you as an artist need to keep developing. So you have the similar options that you had initially for acquiring skills to keep improving your skills. So again, you can watch more tutorials, and that's how you know a good artist. They keep watching tutorials. Reading the manual is a good one as well. Learn other softwares, the software that you've learned and that the one that you're using, investigate it a bit more. See if it can do something that you don't do in your everyday work. Maybe it can do a little bit more. Maybe that's something that you can bring to this environment that you work. Also, ask questions. You rarely work on your own. Usually you work with other artists, and even when you're more senior, you will find junior artists who can do things that you cannot. There will always be people around you who can do some things much better than you can, and there's no shame in asking them, how do they do that? And usually visual effects happens to be kind of a very, very supportive industry, in the sense that the other artists, everyone likes to share the knowledge. So if you ask questions, people generally are very, very happy to answer them. Or if you're already in the industry and you want to keep pushing your skills, you can still take courses. For example, we do evening courses here as well. If you want to add something to your skill set, something that not every artist in your discipline knows about. For example, Unreal Engine is a very sort of, it comes from games, but it's being used more and more in the industry. You could just take a course in that. So this is something that, again, keep developing your skills. That's how you build a career. And like your show reel, you have to show your skills. So when you get a shot to do or an asset to create, if you're a 3D artist, be passionate about it. Even if it is something that you maybe don't immediately feel that passionate about. I worked in commercials, and every now and again you do a commercial for a company or for a product that you don't necessarily care about that much. But at the same time, it still is a artistic challenge, and it is great to kind of take that challenge and to actually make it better, and to feel that you have made it better, and you have contributed to this. So whatever shot you get or whatever asset that you have to create, feel passionate about it. Make it as good as you possibly can. And while you do it, you learn and you keep improving your skills, and the next one you do is even better. And people will appreciate that. So and they will see your skills. So never kind of do lesser work than that, the best that you can do. Very importantly, also be a nice person, and it sort of follows into the same asking questions part. If someone asks you for help, be a nice person to help them. It's visual effects can sometimes be stressful because you have deadlines, and you want to work with people who are nice. There is a sort of sense of camaraderie, sense of we are working and making something together. So you want to work with nice people as well. So likewise, you should be a nice person as well. So if you want to have something that's kind of after this webinar, you want to read a little bit more about our careers and to get a bit more information. So for example, how much do you expect to earn in these different disciplines? I very strongly recommend looking at the Scape Studios Careers Guide. We do this, we have updated this for this year as well, and because we try to keep making it better and more comprehensive, which is there's a sort of a written breakdown for the kind of most important disciplines in 3D, 2D, but also animation and games and motion graphics, and kind of what you need to get into this. What do these people do? So if you want to learn more about this, please do just go to Google and search for Escape Studios Careers Guide. It's very likely to be the first thing that comes up. For me, it's obviously the first because I've searched for it already. And once you sign up for this, it's a free guide. Just answer a few questions. You can download it, and you will see something like this: a fairly thorough breakdown of different disciplines that we just spoke about, and what you can kind of expect from these different disciplines and what do they do. So to wrap up, I will want to show you one video, which is the Scape's own showreel, and just to kind of briefly comment what departments were involved in that. Is that mostly a 3D shot or a 2D shot, and what we can see in that. So this is our latest showreel from this year with the latest student work. Please do check our YouTube website as well to see older work as well. Some nice things in there. So I'll comment over this. So this is an example of 2D. This is 3D generating assets. This is 2D compositing. So things where let's just watch through this. So again, 3D and 2D working together. 3D animation, animation in 3D, 3D and 2D, pure 2D, so taking elements and combining them together. In some ways pure 3D, mostly 3D here as well. Mixture of matte painting and and 3D, a little bit of everything, 3D shot. So there is kind of a lot of creativity you can see in a lot of this as well. So this is an example of an effect shot with involved things like the breaking bricks and fluids. This is another fluid shot. This is a pure 2D shot demonstrating rotoscoping. Use of motion graphics a little bit, some animation, 2D, pure 2D again. Cleanup shots with things like removing rigs, duplicating graphics, pure 3D, picture and painting. So yeah, a few different examples of all these disciplines. So one that I mentioned earlier, effects. So things like fluids, which is the smoke, and things like rigid body dynamics, the breaking objects. Here's a mixture of compositing and 3D and animation. And again, a lot of this effects that you don't really have a real world reference for. What is a force field meant to look like? So there is creativity and artistic challenges in all of these. So from here, what I would recommend is for you guys to look for escapestudios.com for more information and our careers guide from 2019. And also look at job postings. If you just go to Google and search for job postings, find what is it that they are looking for. They usually have a set of skills that you need, a set of softwares that you need to learn, and then come check back with us. Do we teach that? If it's relevant, then yes, probably we do teach that. So I'll now open this for answers. So we have a question here: how to make a show reel which stands out differently from others? Excellent question. The main way is make it better. In some ways, if you and also think about kind of what it is that you're trying to show, because if you're applying for a particular discipline, let's say compositing, then you really just want to make it clear that whatever you're showing there is clear. That if you've composited some 3D, but you didn't create the 3D objects, then attribute that and say that the 3D was made by a different artist, and that's fine. That's how that's encouraged. It is good to see show reels from people who have worked with other artists. This is something that often you don't really see from a show reel itself. It's like, this person can do good work, but can they work with other artists as well? So if there's a way that you can show that you have worked in a team, then that's usually a very beneficial thing. Something that's in some ways slightly less important is if you're doing a show reel for visual effects, you don't really need to worry too much about the motion graphics. You don't need to make a crazy title card with your name. Simple white over black is fine, because really people actually, they hire for skill. So they want to see what it is that you can do in your discipline. So the quick answer: make your reel better than the one that others have. Make your skills clear and show better skills. It's as simple as that. Saying that, when you do start making a show reel, when you do exercises, let's say you're starting here as well, and you have to choose a shot for an assignment. So one thing that we do is we do cleanup. and it's a very basic skill. Earlier you saw here as well these two shots. One is this guy's rowing a boat, and then there's this shot of the horse carriage. So what makes these shots good? The main thing that makes them good is that they're really well done. That the work here has been really well done. But also, it does help for the shot to actually look good artistically as well. So this is a nice shot. It's a nice looking carriage. It doesn't hurt. So having an artistic flair helps. So things that both look technically good, but also they look pretty. So it really does help to make things look pretty. So that's one of the main ways to make a better reel. So here's a question: where can I find elements to practice with? That's also a good question. That is not as easy. And a few more questions. So where to find elements? That is a good question. Shooting your own elements often helps. If you're doing 3D, then you're creating the whole element from scratch. So in some ways, that's you're making the whole thing. So in some ways, it's kind of more fine. But if, for example, if you're doing animation, then you do want to find good rigs, because maybe if rigging isn't what you want to do, you want to find good rigs. So TurboSquid is a classical one where you can find models. For footage, you can find there are a lot of stock footage libraries, anything like this. So those two shots here as well, they've been actually bought from a stock footage library. There are a few of those online, classical ones such as Bond 5. And again, even when you look for these stock footage libraries, if you browse through them, you will find that some of them tend to have more cinematic looking things. So for example, Film Supply, they do things, footage that actually looks really, really nice. So if you want to add something into that as a compare, then again, you're starting with a better source material. Elements you can buy, and there are different stock elements libraries as well that you can buy that do, such as Action VFX for explosions. So there are ways. We have another question, which is, can I take a difficult shot for showreel? Yes, but you need to make it look good. So it's obviously better to have a more difficult shot, and then your showreel as well, you want to show a breakdown. So if you've done something and you put a lot of effort into it, then you want to break it down and you want to make it visible, the amount of effort that actually went into it as well. So a more difficult shot, technically and artistically, will be beneficial as well from the point of view of you can show more skills. I think we are really close to the finishing time as well. So again, like I said earlier, if you have any other questions about our courses, feel free to drop an email to our admissions team. If you want to learn more about the careers in visual effects, do check out the careers guide, which is on our website. So if you just Google careers guide Escape Studios, you will learn more about the different roles in visual effects. And do check in. There will be other interesting seminars that we will be creating in the future. So and events that Escape organizes as well. So if you want to learn more, we are here, and hopefully see you soon. So thank you very much, everyone. My name is Allar Kaasik. I'm the senior VFX tutor here, and this was the 2D, 3D Introduction to Visual Effects seminar. Thank you, everyone.